Claire, can you come scrub my back? The man's voice drifted through the iPad speaker while I was in a London hotel suite, signing off on the final SEC merger filings. Her expression shifted instantly, a mask of sheer panic. Ethan, don't get the wrong idea, she stammered, her eyes darting. Julian's just had way too much to drink. I'm just making sure he gets home safe. I didn't press her. I didn't lose my temper. I simply glanced at the screen. We're in the critical window of a multi-billion-dollar merger and IPO. I reminded her, my tone is flat as a dial tone. Don't do anything that compromises the rollout. She opened her mouth to argue, but I had already tapped the end call button. 2 years into this strategic marriage, I'd never been a man who made decisions based on emotion. If someone wanted to cross the line, they could wait until the closing bell. Then, we'd settle the bill in full. 01, it was 2 a.m., and the London rain was coming down in a heavy, relentless sheet. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse suite, the city lights were smeared into a blurry kaleidoscope by the water. I sat at the mahogany desk, shirt sleeves rolled up to my forearms. Spread out before me was a stack of fresh printouts, the final version of the Sterling Harper merger agreement. This was my third all-nighter this week. I spun my fountain pen once between my fingers before bringing it down to the paper. I paused for a split second at the signature line, verified the figures one last time, and signed. Ethan Sterling. That name currently carried the weight of 2 Fortune 500 companies. My phone buzzed on the desk. A FaceTime request. Caller ID, Claire. I checked the time and hit accept. As the screen flickered to life, my brow twitched almost imperceptibly. The lighting on her end was warm and dim. Definitely not the bright LED chandelier of our living room in Manhattan. Claire was wearing a pale silk slip dress, one strap sliding slightly off her shoulder. Her hair was damp and draped over her back, looking as though she just stepped out of the shower. She looked startled to see me, then forced a bright, brittle smile. Hey babe, still up? I didn't offer a pleasantry. I propped the phone against a stack of files and went back to my paperwork. MHM, I grunted. Claire was my wife in name and contract. 2 years ago, we'd married as a calculated move orchestrated by our respective families. A strategic partnership. No televised wedding. No tabloid circus. Just a prenuptial agreement written with the cold precision of a corporate takeover. She was well-bred, beautiful, and social. To the world, she was Mrs. Sterling. To me, she was a high-maintenance asset placed in a fixed orbit. On the screen, she looked fidgety, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. You look busy. You okay? You look a little tired. It's pre-IPO week. It comes with the territory, I said, my voice devoid of sentiment. Right then, a man's voice drifted in from off-camera. It wasn't loud, but in the silence of my suite, it was deafening. Claire, can you come scrub my back real quick? The fountain pen stopped moving. The nib hovered over the paper, a small dot of ink beginning to bleed into the fiber. I looked up, staring directly into the camera. Claire's face drained of color in a heartbeat. She whipped her head around, as if she'd been burned, then realized the camera was still live and frantically jerked the iPad closer to herself. WH, why are you talking right now? She hissed at someone behind her. The other person didn't respond, likely realizing the mistake. But the damage was done. The atmosphere had shifted. I leaned back in my chair, my gaze steady. I didn't interrogate her. I didn't interrupt. Claire turned back to me, her eyes wide and frantic, her breathing shallow. Ethan, please don't get the wrong idea. Her words tumbled out in a rush. As if she were terrified, I'd hang up. Julian Vance. He got completely wasted at the charity gala. I was just being a friend and getting him home. Julian Vance. The name was familiar. 32, a bottom feeder in the venture capital world who traded on charm and family connections. He and Claire had been close friends since their days at Columbia. Over the last 6 months, his name had been popping up in my orbit far more often than casual socialite would dictate. I'd never mentioned it, not because I didn't know, but because it hadn't been worth the energy. I watched her through the screen. I didn't call her out, and I didn't offer comfort. The ensuing silence felt like an eternity to her. She unconsciously twisted the hem of her silk dress, her knuckles turning white. Finally, I spoke. My voice wasn't loud, but it was ice cold. We are in the home stretch of the biggest merger of the decade. She blinked, nodding reflexively. Do not let a tabloid scandal derail this plan, I said, my eyes darkening. Because if you do, not even God will be able to save your trust fund. I said it slowly. I made sure every word landed. Claire's eyes welled up instantly. She shook her head frantically. I won't, I swear. Ethan, let me explain. She leaned toward the camera, tried to close the distance. I wasn't interested in the sequel. I reached out and tapped the red button. The screen went black, leaving the room to the sound of the London rain. I looked down at the ink blot on the contract, dabbed it with a tissue, but the stain had already set. Whatever. I closed the folder, set it aside, and pulled the next one. Emotion was a devaluing currency, especially in this industry. Whether it was a merger or a marriage, everything was a partnership. Partnerships had ROI, and they had stop-loss triggers. If a partner stopped following the rules, it was time to reevaluate their valuation. The rain kept falling. I picked up the pen and continued signing. In my head, I was already calculating the remaining term of our marriage. 2. I didn't go back to work immediately after hanging up. Instead, I reorganized the files on my desk. It wasn't an emotional reaction. It was a matter of discipline. At this stage of a deal, you can't let any variable go rogue. To me, Claire's video call was simply an item I'd kept in the pending folder that had now been moved to urgent. The marriage had never been the priority. 2 years ago, I knew exactly what I was doing. The Sterlings needed the Harper distribution channels. The Harpers needed the Sterling capital. It was a mutually beneficial trade, and a wedding was the most stable way to lock in the deal. The ceremony had been low-key. No grand vows, no tearful speeches. She had stood by my side in a custom Vera Wang, smiling perfectly for the cameras like a well-packaged product. I signed the license, she nodded, and from that moment on, our relationship was a line item in a contract. For the first year, Claire played the part. She showed up to the right benefits, said the right things, and maintained the dignity of the Sterling name. She didn't meddle in the firm, and she didn't question my hours. At least, not on the surface. The shift happened when she started attending private mixers. At first, it was just scheduling conflicts. I'd fly back from a trip, and she'd be out. I'd need her for a dinner, and she'd claim a migraine. The excuses were always plausible. Then, at a cocktail party, I overheard someone mention Julian Vance. They said he was doing well for himself, always seen on the arm of a Harper girl. I just listened. I didn't intervene. I'd run a background check on Vance. Shady history, unstable projects, a man who lived on introductions and consulting fees. He wasn't the kind of person who belonged in my world, and he certainly didn't belong in my wife's life. I had my assistant compile a file, but I didn't dig deep. There was no need. Before an IPO, any unnecessary movement is just giving ammunition to the short sellers. Claire wasn't smart, but she thought she was. She started testing the fences, asking if I'd mind if she invested in certain projects, taking calls in the other room, dropping Julian's name with an affected air of casualness. I didn't push back. I didn't support it either. That silence was harder for her to handle. She didn't know how much I knew, and she didn't realize that I never expected loyalty from her, only discretion. After that FaceTime call, her messages started flooding in. When my assistant forwarded her calls to the conference room in London, I was in the middle of a meeting with the investment bankers. I signaled for them to continue and stepped to the window. Ethan, I was so flustered yesterday, I didn't explain it right. Her voice was soft, performative. Julian is really just a friend. Please don't overthink this. I looked out at the London skyline. There is no need for repeated explanations. She went quiet for a beat. Are you angry? No, I said. I'm just reminding you of the stakes. She seemed to exhale, then added quickly. I know you're under a lot of pressure. I won't be a distraction. She said it so fast, it sounded like a mantra for herself. I hung up without another word. After the meeting, the lead banker asked if we needed to adjust the equity structure. I told him to proceed as planned. Some people think they're players in the game when, in reality, they're just being allowed to sit at the table. I could see Claire's spiral. She was getting anxious. She'd send 5 texts if I didn't reply in 10 minutes. She asked if we could relax after the IPO. She even brought up the idea of a baby. In a normal marriage, that might be a sign of affection. From her, it sounded like she was looking for a safety rope. Her biggest mistake was thinking I was driven by my heart. I hadn't missed the frequency of her calls to Vance. I hadn't missed the irregular withdrawals from her personal accounts. I was just waiting for the right moment, waiting for the new conglomerate to be legally bulletproof, waiting until she had absolutely no leverage left to negotiate with. Outside, the sun was beginning to peek through the gray London clouds. I closed my laptop and grabbed my coat. In this partnership, I had never invested a single cent of emotion. Therefore, there was no such thing as disappointment. A true reckoning never happens when tempers are high. It happens when the rules are entirely in your favor. 3 after that call, I stayed in London for 4 more days. My schedule was a meat grinder, morning to night, 0 gaps. The bankers, the auditors, the legal teams, everyone was hyper-focused on the finish line, terrified of a last-minute glitch. In times like these, private life is supposed to take a back seat. Claire, however, didn't get the memo. Her messages became a barrage. At first, it was good morning and good night, peppered with "Are you eating enough?" and "Are you getting any sleep?" She was trying to revert to the role of the doting wife. I saw them. I didn't reply. The next day, the calls started. My assistant logged them. I glanced at the list and I moved on. By the third day, she changed tactics. I just finished a grueling session with the audit team when a voice memo came through. The background was quiet, and her voice was a hushed whisper. "Ethan, I know you're busy, but I'm really worried about you. You're over there all alone. No one to look after you." It was a calculated move. Not a reproach, not a plea, just a reminder of her status. I replied with one word: busy. A few minutes later, she sent another: "I don't have much going on this week. What if I fly over to be with you? We can fly back together after the listing ceremony." That wasn't concern. That was a probe. I flipped my phone face down and ignored it until the end of the day. "Not necessary," I finally sent. I could imagine her face when she read those two words. Claire was used to my indulgence. Over the last 2 years, I rarely said no to her. Not because she was important, but because her requests were usually trivial. Galas, new cars, real estate, vacations, all within the budget, all controllable. But this was different. She wasn't trying to get close to me. She was trying to get close to the center of power. She wanted to make sure she was still in. That night, she FaceTime called me directly. I just stepped out of the shower, wearing a robe. Her face popped up on the screen, her makeup perfect, clearly having spent an hour getting ready for a casual call. "Are you really not going to let me come over?" she asked, trying to sound playful, though the smile didn't reach her eyes. "I won't get in the way of your work." I sat on the sofa, drying my hair with a towel. "I don't need company." Her smile faltered. "Ethan, do you have a problem with me?" She finally put on the table: "If this is about the other night, I already explained it." I looked at her, letting the silence hang. For her, every second of silence was a pound of pressure. "I know you don't like my social circle, but Julian, Claire," I interrupted. She stopped. "Talking about this right now isn't going to help you." Her breath hitched. "Then tell me what I should do. You're saying nothing, and it's making me paranoid." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. "Do your job." "And what exactly is my job?" she snapped. I turned back to the screen. "Don't be a liability." The color drained from her face. She looked like she'd been slapped. Her eyes welled up, but she fought the tears. "Is that all I am to you? A liability?" I didn't answer. There was no point. The call ended abruptly. She didn't say goodbye. She just cut the feed. She was quiet for the next 2 days. On the third day, my assistant tapped on my door and handed me a leather-bound file. "Sir, the report you requested." I opened it. It was a comprehensive audit of Claire's personal assets. Properties, accounts, trusts, several offshore investments, and a series of highly questionable wire transfers. One of them was linked directly to a shell company owned by Julian Vance. The amount wasn't astronomical, but the timing was perfect. It hit right when she started spending every night out. I closed the file. "Keep digging." My assistant nodded and slipped out. That evening, Claire reached out again. This time, she didn't play games. "Ethan, can we please just talk? I feel like you're intentionally freezing me out." I stood at my desk, looking at the countdown on my wall calendar. "Wait until I'm back in New York." She hesitated. "When are you back?" "After the IPO." She was silent for a few seconds, likely doing the math. "Fine," she said. "I'll wait." 04 as the countdown to the IPO hit the final 48 hours. The vultures started circling. Invitations for celebratory dinners and strategy sessions flooded in, mostly from people looking to ride the coattails of the new Sterling Harper giant. I declined them all, but that didn't mean I wasn't listening. That night, while I was doing a final line-by-line review with the legal team, my assistant set his phone down next to me. "Sir, word is getting back to us from a private mixer in the Hamptons." I didn't look up. "Go on." Julian Vance was holding court at a bar. He was telling people he's got an inside track on the new conglomerate's entertainment divisions. He claimed you've already given him the green light, and that people should start coming to him if they want a seat at the table. The room went silent. The head of my legal team glanced at me, then immediately looked back at his notes. I set my pen down. Which project is he claiming to be on? There was a small media acquisition on the watch list. It was peripheral, never even made it to a formal review. I nodded. "Cut it. Now." My assistant blinked. "Sir, the whole division?" "Yes. Any project Vance has even breathed on. Scrub him, his firm, and any entity he's ever consulted for. I want him entirely blacklisted from the Sterling Harper ecosystem." "Understood." The meeting resumed. No one mentioned Vance again. To me, this was just routine risk management. But to Julian Vance, it was the end of the world. The next afternoon, a call came in from an unrecognized number. I checked the area code, Manhattan, and answered. Ethan, it's Julian. Julian Vance. His voice was forced, an oily attempt at camaraderie over a backdrop of loud bar noise. Something you need? I asked. Nothing major, he chuckled. I just heard the group is doing some portfolio restructuring. I've got some ideas I think you'd like. Maybe we can grab a drink when you're back and talk shop? Who gave you this number? I asked. He paused. Well, Claire mentioned you wouldn't mind if I got a little more involved in the media side of things. He was using Claire as a shield. It was a pathetic move. Project decisions are handled by the board, I said. We don't do backdoor channels. His tone shifted. Come on, Ethan. Don't be like that. We're all on the same team here. I leaned back, staring at the gray London sky. You and I are not on any team. The line went quiet for 2 seconds. Maybe I'm not expressing myself well, he said, his voice tightening. I'm looking out for Claire, too. She's your wife, and it seems like a waste not to let her have some skin in the game. He had officially crossed the line. Julian, I said his name clearly. Yeah, you've been talking too much at the bar lately. I could hear his breathing hitch. There are things you aren't meant to touch, I continued, and you're in no position to look out for anyone. He finally lost his cool. Ethan, isn't that a bit harsh? I'm just trying to help. Help in the wrong place is just a liability, I said. From now on, don't mention my name. Ever. I hung up. I didn't block him. I didn't need to. That warning was enough. I thought that would be the end of it, but I underestimated his desperation. 2 days later, right before my final internal briefing, my assistant handed me a revised investor observer list. Julian Vance was on it. He'd changed the name of his shell company, repackaged his pitch, and tried to sneak in through a secondary partner. I tossed the list back on the desk. This is a no. Permanently. Also, I added, notify the compliance team. Any future mention of this entity or its principles is an automatic rejection. Don't even bring it to my desk. After he left, I sat in the silence of the suite. The sun was setting over London. Vance's moves were getting frantic. And in this game, desperation usually leads to a fatal miscalculation. He thought he was at the door. He didn't realize the door was never going to open for him. 05 the night before I flew back, I didn't sleep. Not because of nerves, but because of the sheer volume of final confirmations. Emails, calls, and memos blurred together. I sat at that hotel desk until dawn, green-lighting the final IPO sequence. This was the first official appearance of the Sterling Harper global brand. It had to be flawless. At 6 a.m., I messaged my assistant to finalize the New York itinerary. Within 10 minutes, Claire was calling. I let it ring. Then again, on the third attempt, I answered. Are you back yet? She asked, her voice tight with suppressed anxiety. I heard your flight lands today. Tonight, I said. She exhaled sharply. We need to talk. I've had dinner prepared at the penthouse. Just the two of us. I didn't agree or disagree. We'll see. Ethan, she said, her voice dropping. Are you keeping something from me? You're overthinking it. But she wasn't. For me, the IPO was a milestone. For her, it was a closing door. When I landed in New York, I didn't go home. I went straight to the Sterling Harper headquarters. The lights were on. The floor was empty except for the skeleton crew on night watch. I sat in the glass-walled conference room, running through the morning's schedule one last time. My assistant knocked. Sir, Mrs. Sterling is waiting for you at the penthouse. I checked my watch. Fine. When the elevator opened into our penthouse, the lights were all on. Claire was standing in the center of the living room in a tailored black dress, her hair and makeup done to perfection. A bottle of vintage Krug was on the table, 2 glasses untouched. She rushed over the moment she saw me. You're finally here. I handed my coat to the maid and nodded. Something on your mind? She flinched at the coldness of the question, but forced a smile. We haven't had a real dinner in weeks. I thought since the listing is tomorrow, maybe tonight we could. Get to the point, Claire. The smile died on her face. The air in the room became brittle. She walked back to the sofa and sat down, her fingers interlaced so tightly her knuckles were white. Ethan, are you planning to restructure the board's voting rights after the IPO? The knife was finally out. That's a board-level discussion, I said. But I'm your wife, she said, looking up at me. I'm a stakeholder in this family's future. I watched her, offering nothing. I've been thinking a lot lately, she continued, her voice rising in pitch. We're a team. After the IPO, the world is going to be looking at us. Our relationship is part of the brand. It's an asset for you. She paused, searching my face for a reaction. I don't want to be shut out anymore. It was a bold play. When exactly did you feel shut out? I asked. She bit her lip. You don't let me in on anything. The projects, the investments. Your schedule. I don't even know what you're thinking anymore. You don't need to know, I said. Her composure finally broke. But we're married. You can't just treat me like a stranger you're hiding things from. I sat down across from her, my voice steady. Marriage doesn't make us a single entity, Claire. She froze. This is the last time I'm going to tell you this before the bell rings tomorrow, I said. Do not bring your personal emotions into a multi-billion-dollar business deal. She stared at me, her eyes red, but she didn't let the tears fall. Is that a warning? It's a reminder, I corrected, and it's a boundary. The room went silent for a long time. Finally, she spoke in a low, hollow voice. What if I've already crossed it? I met her gaze. Then you should be prepared for the consequences. With that, she seemed to deflate. She finally realized I wasn't talking about our marriage. I was talking about the rules of engagement. I stood up. Get some sleep. Tomorrow is a long day. I went upstairs without looking back. She didn't follow. The opening bell was less than 12 hours away. It was time to settle the accounts. 06 on the day of the IPO, I stood behind the scenes at the New York Stock Exchange. The lights were blinding. The schedule was millisecond perfect. Everything went according to the script. Sterling Harper Global was officially live. As the applause erupted and the confetti fell, I simply nodded to the cameras and walked off the floor. To the world, it was a celebration. To me, it was just the completion of a phase. Back at the office, I told my assistant to clear my schedule. I had one appointment left. Claire. I didn't choose our home or a restaurant. I chose a cold, glass-walled conference room near the office. She was already there when I walked in, sitting in front of a glass of water she hadn't touched. She hadn't bothered with the glam today. Her makeup was light, and she looked exhausted. The IPO was a success. Congratulations, she said, her voice a fragile attempt at normalcy. I sat down across from her. Seat. The door clicked shut, sealing us in. What is this about, Ethan? I placed a manila envelope on the table, but didn't open it. Before we start, I want to know one thing. Today, are we here to solve a problem, or are you going to keep making excuses? Her fingers tightened around her phone. I want to solve it. If you'll just listen to me. I nodded and pushed the envelope toward her. Read this first. She hesitated, then opened it. It wasn't a long document, just a few bank statements, a list of wire transfers, and a calendar of her social engagements cross-referenced with my travel schedule. By the second page, she was trembling. Where did you get this? Irrelevant, I said. The question is, do you deny it? Her breathing became erratic. I can explain. The money. It's not what you think. I was just helping Julian with a short-term cash flow issue. He was in a bind. Helping? I asked. She nodded frantically. Yes. He said the project would pay back in weeks. I didn't think it would take this long. I flipped to the last page and slid it over. And this? She stared at the page and went rigid. It was an undisclosed conflict of interest filing involving a Harper family trust and one of Julian's shell companies. It was small in the grand scheme of the merger, but the intent was clear. I didn't mean to hide it, she whispered. I just didn't think it was such a big deal. Not a big deal, I repeated. She looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears. Ethan, we've been married for 2 years. Do you really feel nothing for me? I made a mistake, and you're treating me like a hostile takeover. I leaned back in the chair. You didn't make a mistake, Claire. You placed a bet against me using my own chips. Her face went ghostly white. I didn't. You did, I interrupted, and you bet that I wouldn't have the heart to call your bluff. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The silence in the room was heavy. If I cut him off completely, she finally asked, I won't see him. I'll get the money back. I'll do whatever you want. Too late, I said. Those 2 words broke her. Why? She sobbed, standing up. Did you ever even give me a chance? You stayed silent, and then you just handed down a death sentence. I stood up as well, my voice remaining level. I gave you plenty of chances. The warnings, the boundaries, the reminders. You ignored every single one. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine terror in her eyes. What are you going to do? I sat back down and placed a new document on the table. This is a separation agreement based on the breach of contract clauses in our prenup. The conditions for dissolution have been met. Her pupils dilated. You're divorcing me? I'm terminating a partnership. Corrected. She collapsed back into the chair, the air leaving her lungs. What if I don't sign? Then we go to court, I said. The outcome won't change. The process will just be considerably more public and humiliating for your family. She sat in silence for a long time. The tears finally fell, splashing onto the mahogany table. I didn't offer a tissue. I didn't offer a hand. Some scenes shouldn't be interrupted. She looked up at me, her voice raspy. What about Julian? Did you go after him too? I didn't deny it. What's going to happen to him? That's his problem, I said. It has nothing to do with you. She closed her eyes and took a shuddering breath. Fine, she whispered. I'll sign. I slid the pen across the table. Her hand shook, but she signed quickly. In that moment, the bridge behind us was gone. I gathered the papers and stood up. My lawyers will be in touch with your father's office. She didn't look up. As I reached the door, I paused. Claire. I looked back at her. From the very beginning, this relationship was never meant to be a gamble. She didn't respond. I walked out and the door clicked shut behind me. The accounts were open. The rest was just a matter of time. 3 days after the agreement was signed, the first round of internal restructuring at Sterling Harper was completed. It was a surgical strike. Claire's various consultant, roles, and honorary board positions were terminated effective immediately. The reason cited was a standard redundancy review following the merger. The paperwork was airtight. The process was perfectly legal. She didn't hear it from the gossip columns. She realized that the second her corporate access card was deactivated. That afternoon, she called me. I was in a meeting with the CFO. I didn't step out. I took the call on speaker in front of my team. Why wasn't I told? Her voice was low, trembling with a mix of fury and fear. It's standard procedure during a merger, I said. But I've been part of these projects for a year, she snapped. How is it going to look if I'm suddenly gone? You don't need to worry about how it looks, I said. You no longer represent the firm. There was a long silence on her end. Ethan, you're backing me into a corner. I'm executing the agreement you signed. She hung up. She finally understood that the signature she'd put on that paper was irreversible. After the call, the CFO glanced at me. Sir, regarding the Harper Trust distributions, should we delay the final adjustment? No, I said. Follow the contract to the letter. He nodded and moved on. In the world of high finance, emotion doesn't dictate the order of operations. Claire was receiving exactly what the contract stipulated, which was significantly less than she had anticipated. She thought that after the IPO, she'd be a queen. Now she realized she was just a former contractor being paid out. That night, she showed up at the office. She didn't have an appointment, and she didn't have a badge. Security called up, and I told them to let her through. When she walked into my office, she looked wrecked. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Her hair was a mess. She looked like she'd been crying for hours. Do you really have no mercy? She asked, standing in front of my desk. I gestured to the chair. Sit down. She stayed standing. I thought you were just trying to scare me. I didn't think you'd actually go this far. You were mistaken, I said. I don't do scare tactics. I do business. Her shoulders began to shake. And Julian? Have you pushed him into the dirt, too? I looked up at her. Are you still worried about him? That was the final blow. Her composure shattered. If you hadn't been so cold, I wouldn't have. She stopped mid-sentence. She realized that making excuses now only made her look smaller. I didn't fill the silence. A few seconds later, she turned and ran out of the office, slamming the heavy oak door behind her. The next morning, I got word that Julian Vance was done. His flagship project's funding had evaporated overnight. Every major investor had pulled out simultaneously, citing compliance risks. It was a coordinated exit, one I had set in motion weeks ago. By noon, my assistant told me Vance was downstairs, demanding to see me. He's pretty unstable, sir, he added. I checked my watch. Send him up. Julian Vance looked like a different person. His suit was wrinkled, his face was sallow, and he smelled like stale cigarettes and desperation. Ethan, he started, his voice a frantic pitch. There must be some kind of misunderstanding. I signaled for my assistant to leave and closed the door. What kind of misunderstanding do you think this is? He rubbed his hands together nervously. My project, my investors all bailed at once. I can only think of one person with that kind of reach. You're overestimating yourself, I said. The market makes its own judgments. He looked sick, but everything was fine last week. That was last week, I said. Today, you're a bad investment. He stared at me, his eyes darting. Is this because of Claire? Because if it is, I can explain everything. You don't need to explain anything, I interrupted. You need to worry about your debt. He froze. What? It means you're out of the game, I said. And not just this project. Your name is radioactive in this town. His face went from pale to ghostly. Ethan, we don't have to do this. I never wanted to be your enemy. What you wanted doesn't matter, I said. What matters is that you overstepped. He tried to find words, but his mouth just worked soundlessly. You leveraged a relationship you didn't own, I continued. You leaked information you didn't have a right to. This is the natural result. He slumped into a chair, the reality finally sinking in. He sat there for a long time, looking at his hands. I see, he whispered. I shouldn't have thought I could play at this level. I didn't walk him to the door. He stood up and left without looking back. As the day ended, my assistant brought in the final confirmation filings. I signed them and looked out at the Manhattan skyline. Everything was moving exactly where it was supposed to. There were no surprises left. 08 The divorce was finalized on a rainy Tuesday morning. There were no arguments, no drama. The lawyers had already hammered out the details, and the court clerk just checked the boxes and stamped the files. It was an administrative task, like renewing a passport. Claire didn't say a word. She wore a simple black coat, her hair tied back, her face pale and drawn. When she signed the final decree, her hand paused for a second, then she scribbled her name and walked out without a second glance. I didn't follow her. Outside the courthouse, the sun was starting to break through the clouds. People were rushing by, focused on their own lives, unaware that a 2-year merger of two of the city's most powerful families had just been dissolved. To the world, it wasn't even news. To me, it was the final settlement of a bad debt. Back at the office, a new round of meetings was already waiting. The merger was fully integrated, and the new business lines were humming. I sat at the head of the table, listening to the Q3 projections. Problems were identified. Solutions were implemented. No one mentioned Claire. Her name had been scrubbed from the system as if she'd never been there. It was the most honest outcome for a relationship built on paper. I returned to my office after the meeting. My desk was immaculate. The framed photo of us from the Hamptons Gala was gone. My assistant hadn't asked. He'd just known. I checked my schedule. A merger in Singapore next month, a tech acquisition in Silicon Valley, and an internal audit in December. The void was already filled. Claire reached out once more through her lawyers, asking if we could renegotiate a specific real estate clause. I told my counsel to stick to the signed agreement. No exceptions. A few days later, the request stopped. As for Julian Vance, I never saw him again. I heard rumors he was selling off his assets to stay afloat, but I wasn't interested. He was never supposed to be part of the story anyway. As evening fell, I stood at the window of my office, watching the city lights flicker on. The Sterling Harper logo glowed bright on the tower across the street. This was the empire I had built, piece by piece, exactly according to the plan. My phone buzzed. A confirmation for tomorrow's board meeting. I typed back, confirmed. The traffic below was a constant, unbreaking line of light. I've always known that I'm not a man who makes decisions with his heart. The partnership was over, but that didn't mean it was a failure. It was just complete. If you want to go far in this world, you can't afford to waste time on a contract that's already expired.